Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this side event on the theme of responsibility and solution sharing, the role of religious organizations responding to large migrant and refugee movements. We have a number of speakers today, and we're most honored, first of all, to welcome our keynote speaker, His Eminence Pietro Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State to His Holiness. And we also then will follow the order that you may have seen in the flyer that we circulated. Cardinal Parolin will speak first. We will have two respondents. Mrs. Karen Al-Boutsaid, the UN Special Advisor on the Summit on Addressing Large Movements of Refugees and Migrants. And then Sir Peter Sutherland, as you probably heard this morning at the general session, is not able to travel right now. He's been ill. And so his close associate, Mr. Gregory Maniatis, will speak on his behalf. And then we'll follow with a panel of speakers from the field. Father Flor Maria Rigoni, a Scalabrini father from Mexico. Sister Donna Markham, the president of and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, which is part of Caritas North America. Mrs. Petra Huek, the director of the International Catholic Migration Commission in Europe. And then Mr. Omar Al-Muqdad, a journalist and a Syrian refugee. And I want to say a special welcome to all of these, the speakers and the panelists. My name is Robert Vitillo. I'm the Secretary General of the International Catholic Migration Commission, one of the co-organizers of this event, which has been organized by the Permanent Mission of the Holy See to the UN and Caritas Internationalis and then ICMC. So you're all very welcome. And Your Eminence, may we call upon you first.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all in the name of His Holiness Pope Francis. I am delighted to be with you. I am delighted to be with you in this morning's event on the theme of responsibility and solution sharing, the role of religious organizations in responding to large movements of refugees and migrants. The challenges posed by large movements of refugees and migrants are of grave concern for both the Holy See and the United Nations. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development pledges to leave no one behind. Among those left behind are the tens of millions of refugees, migrants, and internally displaced persons in our world today. While migration has always been with us, it is becoming an unprecedented phenomenon in our days. I am well aware that the statistics and impact of these migratory movements will be reviewed repeatedly throughout today, so I will not impose upon our limited time together to repeat these numbers. I wish, however, to underline the worrying fact that so many of the large movements of refugees and migrants these days are involuntary, caused by situations of conflict and violence, persecutions and discrimination, poverty and environmental degradation. It is even worse when we consider that during their journey, migrants and refugees face the dangers of trafficking, starvation, and many forms of abuse, and upon arriving at their destination, rather than finding a safe haven, they find mistrust, suspicion, discrimination, extreme nationalism, racism, and the lack of clear policies regulating their acceptance. Through the centuries, religious institutions and faith-inspired organizations have played important roles in responding to the needs of refugees and migrants. Through this event, the Holy See intends to express profound gratitude for what religious institutions and faith-based organizations have done and continue to do in favor of refugees and migrants, and to examine how the services they provide can be improved further in these most challenging times and situations. From time immemorial, people from a wide range of faith traditions have given special attention to the needs of migrants and refugees. The Jewish people were deeply molded by their experience of Exodus, an experience of dispersion, exile, slavery, then freedom in the Promised Land. Some centuries earlier, the patriarch Abraham had followed God's call to migrate from his ancestral home to the land of Canaan. The Judeo-Christian tradition regarding the treatment of refugees and other migrants is firmly rooted in this ethical and religious injunction. You shall not oppress an alien. You well know how it feels to be an alien since you were aliens yourselves in the land of Egypt. Jesus, who himself was a refugee during his earliest years, taught the action that will determine our final judgment. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. A stranger, and you welcomed me." Muslims measure time from the founding event of Muhammad Hijra from Mecca to Medina. The Quran teaches that believers should serve God and do good to orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companions by your side, the wayfarer that you meet, and those who have nothing. For institutions and members of the Catholic Church, our reflections and actions in response to refugee and other migration movements are guided by the rich body of Catholic doctrine and tradition that has developed during the course of the past 2 millennia. Pope Francis has undoubtedly placed refugee and migrants at the top of his agenda. It was neither a casual decision nor a random choice that Pope Francis' first trip outside Rome was to the Mediterranean island of Lampedusa in July 2013 to witness to human solidarity and Christian charity for refugees and migrants firsthand, and to underline the Catholic Church's deep commitment to the welfare of the most vulnerable and needy of our brothers and sisters. He prayed for the dead, asked forgiveness for the failure of the global human family to respond to sufferings of refugees and migrants, for what he called the globalization of indifference. And he challenged our consciences, lest the tragedies that have sent thousands to their deaths be repeated. In April 2016, Pope Francis, together with the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus and Archbishop Hieronymus of Athens and all Greece, went to Lesbos, Greece, to demonstrate their profound concern for the tragic situation of the innumerable refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, and to call for a response of solidarity, compassion, generosity, and an immediate practical commitment of resources. While fighting to eliminate the root causes of large movements of refugees and migrants, we are faced with tens of millions of people who urgently need our care. Local faith communities, both Christian and others, are generally attentive to the protection of people and serve as first responders to refugee movements across borders and to those internally displaced. In environments characterized by fear, violence, and suspicion, they provide a human approach and immediate assistance for the basic necessities of life and the vital health needs of migrants, post-traumatic physical care and emotional support, services of accompaniment and advocacy, facilitating and forming positive cross-community relationship as a precondition of sustainable humanitarian projects, community resilience in the aftermath of crisis, and local integration. It is said that while faith-based organizations are not always the first to respond to emergencies, they are often the last to leave. Faith communities' activity in this field confirms them as competent and essential stakeholders in facilitating collaboration. This is important especially where conflicts and violence aim at destroying the presence of believers of certain faiths and expel them, even if that presence is an ancient one and an important moderating and geopolitical balancing factor. A little more than a year ago, Pope Francis appealed for Catholic parishes in Europe to welcome a refugee family. Because of this appeal, more than 30,000 migrants are being hosted by various religious structures. For those refugees who cannot remain in the country of asylum or return to their respective home countries, some faith-based organizations are engaged in organizing their resettlement in a third country. Both our co-sponsor of today's event, the International Catholic Migration Commission and Caritas, have been extremely active in such processes in many parts of the world. Faith communities have developed humanitarian passageways so that Syrians already recognized as refugees can avoid dangerous journeys to seek resettlement in Europe. The refugees for whom Pope Francis assumed the responsibility, those he brought with him from Lesbos and those who came later, were channeled through this program. Many Catholic institutions work to assist migrant women and girls, rescued victims of trafficking, many of them forced migrants. Religious orders have prioritized the protection and education for migrant children. It is tragic that around the world, nearly 50 million children have migrated across borders or been forcibly displaced, 28 million of whom fleeing violence and insecurity. We are fully aware that we must also improve our efforts at coordination and raise voices to address the root causes of their displacement. In the seas of the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Caribbean, in the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East, in the jungles of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, millions risk everything. Thousands have lost their lives while trying to escape conflicts and violence, persecution, environmental degradation, and poverty. In Lesbos, Pope Francis, the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus, and Archbishop Hieronymus urge the international community to fight these underlying causes of massive humanitarian crisis through diplomatic, political, and charitable initiatives and through cooperative efforts. Among the world emergencies that cause displacement, those which concern the African continent tend to be neglected. Too many countries are facing extreme insecurity and violence, enduring and ongoing conflicts. Moreover, in too many cases, people's religion, an integral part of African identity, has been manipulated in an offensive way. Nevertheless, there are numerous examples of interreligious dialogue and action that continue to play a key role in preventing displacement while maintaining social cohesion and dialogue. Similarly, such action counters innumerable violations of human rights, environmental degradation, corruption, obscure financial and commercial plans, unequal assignment and delivery of development funds. These joint efforts seek to foster peace and the renewal of the human and social fabric in post-conflict areas. I am particularly happy to mention a decision which further emphasizes His Holiness' concern for uprooted peoples. In instituting the new dicastery for promoting integral human development at the beginning of this month, Pope Francis placed under his personal guidance the section that specifically oversees matters concerning refugees and migrants. I will close my remarks with the Pope's own words that could serve as a firm foundation on which to build an effective action framework for the summit. He states, "A nation which seeks the common good cannot be closed in on itself. Societies are strengthened by network of relationship. The current problem of immigration makes this clear. Dialogue is essential. Instead of raising walls, we need to be building bridges. All these issues, thorny as they may be, can find shared solutions which are reasonable, equitable, and lasting." Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Pope Francis, I thank you most sincerely for what you have done and continue to do to assist in every way refugees and migrants who are among those most left behind and most in need. And thank you also for joining us for this side event.
Your Eminence, we thank you for reminding us that welcoming the stranger is deep within the religious traditions of many different faith traditions. Also for recalling the long history, not just of teaching, but of practice in welcoming the stranger among different faith organizations. And then also for especially recalling for those of us who are from the Catholic faith tradition, the teaching, but also the deeds, especially those deeds that have been shown by His Holiness Pope Francis. So we're very grateful for your presence here, and we please ask you to bring our greetings to the Holy Father. So now I would like to call on Mrs. Karen Aboutside, the UN Special Advisor on the Summit on addressing large movements of refugees and migrants. Karen?
I thank the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See, the ICMC, and Caritas for organizing this event specifically about the role of religious organizations in our common effort to protect refugees and migrants. And good evening, morning to all of you. I also thank His Eminence, Pietro Cardinal Parolin, for his words about the compassionate action of the Church in response to the large number of refugees and migrants today. Over the past year, there's been powerful leadership from Pope Francis, from church leaders, and many people of faith from different religions on the global challenge posed by refugee and migrant movements. This morning, member states of the United Nations have come together to adopt the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants. This document establishes a policy framework and imbues it with the unique legitimacy that comes from being adopted at the highest level in the General Assembly, an international body with universal participation based on the principle of equality. States have the responsibility to set policy regarding refugees and migrants based on international obligations, as well as their values and national interests. Multilateral institutions like the United Nations provide both a forum for dialogue on the content of international obligations and a body of operational and technical expertise on how to interpret and implement these obligations. Religious organizations shape this policy-making process through their example and their manner of speaking about refugees and migrants. Religious organizations root their discussion of refugees and migrants in ancient traditions about hospitality, which we've heard from His Eminence, welcoming the stranger, respect, compassion, and dignity. This framing of the issue has been weakened at a time when political rhetoric about foreigners has grown angry and alarmist. Refugees and migrants are being collectively blamed for all manner of social ills and the resulting policy impulses to deter, to restrict, to punish, and deport. Excuse me. Religious organizations help form public opinion to create the conditions for leaders to take humane and rational decisions, as opposed to those based on unwarranted fears and speculations, which the Pope referred to in a message on migrants last year. Words matter, and stories matter. The stories we see and tell and the language and words we use and choose to talk about migration and refugees matter. For this reason, the Secretary General has called on member states to support a global campaign to combat xenophobia, building on existing campaigns of UN agencies and civil society. Many member states also deplore the fact that xenophobic rhetoric is becoming socially and politically unacceptable. I was very pleased that the campaign and a strong condemnation of xenophobia feature prominently in the declaration adopted this morning. Policies and national action plans also matter. There's work that can be done beyond campaigns and in addition to them. Countering xenophobia and ensuring that refugees and migrants are welcome and integrated in inclusive societies are essential building blocks for successful refugee and migration policies. Religious organizations play a vital role in welcoming and integrating refugees and migrants. This is another area of partnership between states, multilateral organizations, and religious organizations. Because of their traditions of hospitality, faith communities are often the first to respond in the initial stages of a humanitarian crisis. They step forward by virtue of their presence, local knowledge, network, and assets, even or especially in some of the most isolated and remote areas. They respond quickly because of their values that are expressed in different words and stories, but are strikingly similar in their hospitable welcome to a stranger in distress. In the Hindu culture, the guest is God. In the Buddhist culture, the value of compassion involves empathy for the suffering of others. The Jewish Torah makes 36 references to honoring the stranger. The Holy Quran calls for the protection of the asylum seeker, or mustamin, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, whose safety is irrevocably guaranteed. As noted in the Surat al-Anfa, those who give asylum and are in very truth the believers, for them is the forgiveness of sins and a provisions most generous. And the Christian scriptures, as you will all know, say, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. States and international organizations must recognize how much is to be gained by engaging with faith communities to improve outreach to the most vulnerable. This partnership must be based on respect for the diversity of identities, values, and traditions. It must respect the spirit of equality, cooperation among states and traditions in multilateral organizations and faith communities that's based on a shared set of objectives and premised on mutual respect. By building these effective partnerships, states and multilateral organizations will create better policies based on respectful debate. This will ensure that, in the words of Pope Francis, integration will become mutual enrichment, open up positive perspectives to communities, and prevent the danger of discrimination, racism, extreme nationalism, or xenophobia, unquote.
We're especially grateful to you, Ms. Abu-Said, for helping us to see the complementarity among the different societal components, especially states, multilateral organizations, faith-based organizations, and civil society in general. And then again, for your recognition of the role of those religious organizations in trying to defend and protect the strangers, and also to fight against the xenophobia and the hatred that regrettably is too prevalent in society today. We also want to thank you especially for your personal service in this area at UNHCR, at UNRWA, and in many other additional responsibilities with the UN. And now I'd like to call upon Mr. Gregory Maniatis to represent Peter Sutherland here.
Thank you, Your Eminence, Father Karen. I think that Peter, who you heard earlier, is not able to be in New York. I think if he had a choice between speaking in the hallowed hall this morning, the General Assembly, or here, he would have chosen to be here because of his profound respect for Pope Francis and for the leadership that he has shown, and because Peter is a deeply religious man who has been very close to the Catholic Church forever in his life, and he is also currently the president of the ICMC. So rather than trying to replace Peter, I thought I would channel him for you, because replacing him is not possible. And I wanted to share some passages from an address that he delivered in 2012 to the 50th Eucharist Congress in Dublin, which 4 years later, I think perfectly fit the current context. It starts like this. I submit to you that the greatest challenge we face today is also our oldest one: how to live well together. It harkens back to the very essence of the ancient Greek concept of koinonia, which is at the heart of Christian theology. It harkens back, too, to the fundamental values of the dignity of man and the equality of man, which are at the heart of Christianity, and I would add, of the United Nations. The challenge of living well together, of fostering intimate participation in a civic setting, has always been present, but it's been thrown into sharp relief in recent years and decades by the speed of change in our societies, especially, but not only, as a result of immigration. There are different degrees of diversity. There are those immigrants who share the cultural heritage of the host nation in inter-European countries, for instance. Others, of course, do not. So just at the moment in history when centripetal forces, globalization, immigration, are bringing us all closer together and introducing unprecedented diversity into our communities, we also must contend with the tendency of centrifugal forces like political extremism that push us apart. This is both a threat and an opportunity. The threat is obvious: divided communities, alienation, insecurity. The opportunity might be less apparent, but it is an extraordinary one. We have the chance to reimagine and rebuild our communities. To do so, we need to reinvent the common space in our societies so that we can once again pursue common projects, show solidarity with one another, and restore faith in shared values. This brings me back to the idea of koinonia. Considered broadly, koinonia, which appears 19 times in the Greek New Testament, is a complex and rich Greek approach to building community. Put simply, it implies communion by intimate participation. English translations of the New Testament barely do it justice, invoking fellowship, sharing, participation, and contribution. Koinonia is all of these things and more. It creates bonds among neighbors as people share their joys and pains together and are united by their common experiences and goals. Fellowship trumps individualism, and creates a mutual bond, fulfilling the deeply human need for belonging and companionship. Koinonia fosters sharing and generosity. It holds the key of joint participation in something with someone, such as in a community or a team. Koinonia highlights a higher purpose that benefits the greater good. The term enthusiasm is connected to this meaning of koinonia, for it signifies to be imbued with the Spirit of God in us. Migration tests both our prejudices and our generosity at the individual level and the level of communities and nations. Regulating immigration has proved to be an unequal struggle for most governments. That was proven over the past 4 years since this was first written. Unintended consequences, hard cases, reviews, and repeated reforms make up the story. The paradox of local and global loyalties, our obligations to both stranger and friend, stress test the integrity of our goodwill. The encounter of different faiths and cultures constrain tolerance. For men and women of today, the drama that everything is always changing can create profound levels of uncertainty and insecurity that reinforce defensiveness. Inevitably, these large problems create sharp questions for leaders and societies and radical challenges to their capacities for leadership. We are a long way short of clear thinking about migration. The inexhaustible resources of the church can lend us the courage not to be dismayed by the scale of our global discontent. The Mass reforms our attitudes to our own contexts and gives each one the means to exercise the generosity and sacrifice of leadership in his or her individual life. We remember that the voice of wisdom in the face of apparently cosmic questions, whether climate change, political freedoms, or migration, is rooted in what we already know, the teaching of the Gospels and the teaching of the Church. Disaggregated into its component elements, a problem like migration resolves itself into choices which are fundamentally moral in character, and not simply the preserve of specialists, economists, or sociologists, much though we have to learn from their research and guidance. We are not helpless, even if the direction of high national policy is not in our hands. Even if our daily work does not impinge on the problem of migration, the attitudes we show may well impinge on individual migrants and on our communities which have decisions to make about migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregory, for so kindly coming to share Peter's words with us. And please give him our regards, especially for those of us from ICMC. We are so grateful to have him as our president, so we're very concerned about him. Also, I would say as a priest, there's lots of good homily material in those reflections, so thank you for sharing with us. And now we'll move on to our panel. Each panelist has 7 minutes for an intervention. Several of them have come to me already and said, could I have a few more minutes? But we want to leave room for discussion with all of you. And so first we'll call upon Father Flor Maria Rigoni.
Dear sisters and dear brothers, friends, all. Here I am neither as a man or a missionary, nor even as a representative of a voiceless people. Here I stand before you as a man who became a cry of despair and keeps betting on a new horizon because the migrants have taught me to invent day after day the reasons of my song of hope. For the past 18 years, I have ministered a shelter for asylum seekers in the southern borders of Mexico with Guatemala. At our doors, we have our little Latin America, Syria. Yes, the so-called Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, is disrupted by an undeclared civil war. The flow of migrants we attend every day do not belong to the economic category. They do not choose migration for a better lifestyle, for a better shot up the social ladder. They escape and flee for survival. According to the testimony of a mother of 5 children, she told me, "Father, do not forget that in my country we bear our coffin day after day on our shoulders, because every moment and every place can be our cemetery with our cross and with our flowers." Indeed, Central America seems to be not as important as Syria and its environment. In the world map, it is insignificant as it was during the civil wars of the 80s. Who cares about it? Here I am, pierced by the grief of thousands of people, turned into a cry that would like to wake up the desert, to emerge from an ocean of violence and ask for help. A former guerrilla told me one day, oppressed by a deep sadness, "You remember, Father, how at the time of civil war, the front lines were clearly defined, army and guerrilla. Today, we are surrounded by a cage without name. The death has no face, no warning. It catches you by surprise and sweeps you away." My cry is not a political process or judgment. It is despair and hope at the same time that gives me the power to appeal for people of goodwill. It deals with children, women, who flee for nowhere, who dream for a piece of land and a society where dialogue and dignity, in short a minimum ground of freedom, could give them back a prohibited smile. People speak of failed states, of territorial disputes among drug cartels. Possibly everyone is correct. Certainly, we face a people in disarray, confused and upset by a stampede that someone or something has unchained. Maybe it is difficult for you to believe that I was compelled to create a new term, the orphanage of brothers. Yes, when a girl or a boy reaches adolescence and are intercepted by the different street gangs, they are given 12 to 72 hours to join them. Otherwise, they are killed, sometimes even beheaded. So their younger brothers and sisters know that pretty soon they too will face this crossroad, to become a bandit or the amusement for a pack of wolves. Let me conclude with a story that profoundly moved me. It deals with a young mother from Honduras. She was a guest in our shelter, and one day she decided to head up to the United States. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from her. She thanked me and shared her story. "Father, when we arrived at Matamoros, we managed to find a coyote who helped us to cross the Rio Bravo. As soon as I touched the American shore, I spoke out my simple prayer, Oh God, I thank you. I fulfilled my dream. At this point, I heard an intimidating voice commanding me, "Raise up your hand, woman, and turn around slowly." It was a Border Patrol officer. He handcuffed me and told me to get into the vehicle with some others. Suddenly, this woman began crying into the telephone and told me, "Father, may the Lord God and you forgive me for what I will tell you." I looked at the officer and said, "Officer, do me one last favor. Take out your gun and shoot me down here. For me, there is no return. Let my children who remained with their grandmother say, at least, our mother reached the States." The officer remained silent for a while and eventually told me, "Woman, I never saw you." He unshackled me, and I am calling you from Chicago. That officer did not comply with the rules of the Border Patrol, but instead demonstrated the heart of the American nation. I ask the same here. Honor the spirit of the law, even if it breaks the letter of the law. Break the rule of selfishness and reach out your hand to this peripheral coin of Central America. Thank you.
Father Flora Maria, because I think you know by the silence that was in this room that you grounded us into the pain and the experience of so many of the migrants and refugees. And we thank you for that. And it brings us to the reason why we're in here. And let's hope that some of the policies that we continue to advocate for, and hopefully that will be implemented, will be done with the spirit of the law and not just the letter. But also you brought us hope because you shared with us the experience of this woman who faced tragedy and yet was able to start a new life. And let's hope that her children have a different life because of that. So thank you very much for sharing with us. And now I'd like to call on Sister Donna Markham, the President and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, and also representing Caritas Internationalis in this testimony.
Thank you. Your Eminence, Excellencies, and distinguished guests, today I would like to highlight the plight of those migrants and refugees that Catholic Charities meets each day across the United States. And unfortunately, many of the stories don't end as well as this woman's. I wish to draw attention also to the work of those who face the political, social, and economic backlash for daring to open their doors to those who are looking for life and safety in this country. By way of background, Catholic Charities USA represents 177 diocesan and affiliated Catholic Charities agencies across the United States and our territories. Collectively, Catholic Charities Network serves over 8 million people every year. Last year alone, Catholic Charities settled a third of the approximately 70,000 refugees in the United States. The agencies also provided legal immigration services to over 19,000 migrants and served over 37,000 unaccompanied children. While we're proud of the work that Catholic Charities agencies provide throughout the United States, as a member of Caritas Internationalis, I would be remiss if I failed to note that Catholic Charities represents but a small part of the global Caritas Internationalis movement and the work that they provide across the world to assist migrants and refugees. The 165 members of Caritas Internationalis also respond each day to the needs of refugees and migrants across the world, while at the same time working in the migrants' home countries to ensure that each person has a right not to migrate. While Pope Francis has shown a light on the faces of migrants in Europe, in the United States, we sadly see those similar faces. Catholic Charities are welcoming refugees from all parts of the world and extending love and support to each frightened human being who comes desperately to us in search of safety and dignity. The refugees are courageous and resilient people. It's important to note that the story of refugees is not only one of resiliency, but also one of contributing to their new homeland. And this is a story that's not often shared. In the preliminary findings of a study conducted by Catholic Charities partners at the Lab for Economic Opportunity at the University of Notre Dame, we found that refugee children who enter the United States at the age of 12 or younger graduate from high school at rates that are above or comparable to U.S.-born children. In addition, when looking at refugees that have entered the United States between the ages of 21 and 40, over the first 20 years that they spend in the United States, they individually contribute over $21,000 more in state, local, and federal taxes than they received in benefits. These findings attest to the fact that refugees contribute to the fabric of our communities as well as to our nation's economic well-being. In addition to our work of settling refugees, the Catholic Charities ministry in the United States is facing a unique challenge. Since 2009, the U.S. southern border has seen a dramatic increase in the numbers of unaccompanied minors coming to the United States in search of protection. Prior to 2009, a little less than 10,000 unaccompanied children were stopped by our Border Patrol along the southern border in any given year. However, since 2009, the number has dramatically increased, with 68,000 unaccompanied children being apprehended at the U.S. border in 2014 and over 54,000 so far this year. To get to the border, these children and families face a harrowing journey of predation by human traffickers, physical and sexual abuse, and violence at every stage of the trip. Once they get to the border, the U.S. border, their struggles are clearly not over. Unaccompanied children face detention and placement in shelters or foster care, and potentially years of uncertainty as their asylum claims are adjudicated. While many of these children have legitimate asylum claims, most will be forced to prove these claims and challenge deportation without the assistance of an attorney. Catholic Charities agencies across the south and west of the U.S. are engaged in assisting them in any way that we can. Families arriving at the border face a challenging experience when they come to the United States, with many placed in family detention centers where children, including infants, are incarcerated with their parents until their case can be addressed. Recently, staff from Catholic Charities saw firsthand the situation in one of these family detention centers where they arrived to work with the population at the Dilley Detention Center in Texas. They found a for-profit detention center where families, including children, were detained for 1 to 3 days without a shower, limited access to sinks, Food was scarce, and lights were kept on 24 hours a day. After this initial detention, they were moved to permanent detention, where Catholic Charities representatives and other groups do their very best to break through the language barrier and prepare them to represent themselves in an asylum interview. If they pass this interview, then they must put up a bond of $1,500 to $5,000 and find a family member or a guardian to stay with until their next hearing. This is happening in the United States. In McAllen, Texas, Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley has been on the front line in providing families arriving each day with food, clothing, and shelter they need to survive. In the first 4 weeks of operation during the height of the crisis, Sacred Heart Parish Church in McAllen, in conjunction with Catholic Charities, provided support to over 3,000 immigrants. The scale of the crisis in the United States and around the world is a reminder that words and promises are not enough. My hope, my sincere hope, is that our leaders will work diligently to implement the declaration that was passed this morning, to ensure that all migrants and refugees have the protection, safety, and basic human rights afforded by their inherent human dignity, that families are ensured that they may remain united and children are no longer incarcerated, and that we will together address the root causes that have caused people to migrate. And in my own country, I hope sincerely that the United States government's response to this summit translates into a response commensurate with the global challenge. In closing, I just want to remind all of the international community of the many, many people that work daily, labor daily through all kinds of organizations to address the needs of migrants and refugees, because they do so out of a profound love and professionalism, but they sometimes face serious, significant political and social hostility. So with that, along with Caritas Internationalis, it is my sincere hope that today's summit sends a strong signal that the human rights of refugees, internally displaced persons, and migrants are not up for debate. People fleeing conflict, persecution, natural disasters, failed development, and the effects of climate change are entitled to the full enjoyment of their human rights. Thank you.
Sister Donna, thank you for going into the detail of the responses that are necessary in terms of welcoming people in this country, and also for the experience of Caritas Internationalis throughout the world. Also, maybe just to complete the process a bit, I hope I won't be accused of bias when I say that many of those refugees who are resettled here have been protected, processed, and oriented by ICMC in different parts of the world. And also their first arrival is arranged through the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Migration and Refugee Services. That's the member of ICMC and works very closely through the Diocesan Catholic Charities and other Catholic structures. So you could see the whole range of services. But also, I think it's so important that you also brought the theme of resilience into this and showed the accomplishments of people when they come and they are able to contribute to a new homeland. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Petra Weck, who is the director of ICMC Europe.
Is it a little bit here? Okay. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give my sincere thanks for the invitation to provide some perspectives on the developments in Europe with respect to receiving and welcoming refugees, and underline the crucial role faith-based organizations and churches are playing in it. One can say that this role is even more vital in the context of an increasingly polarized and often toxic debate, more and more dominated by the voices of populist parties across Europe. A debate in which local voices that express common human values and solidarities with those in need are not heard enough. The reality at local level is often very different and constructive, and it is here that integration takes place every day, step by step. My presentation today will tap into the experiences that ICMC has had over the past years in the context of the SHARE network, which is a diverse network of cities and local actors that was created with the support of the European Union to expand resettlement across Europe through the strengthening of dialogue and exchange of best practices in planning for local integration of resettled refugees. Between 2012 and 2015, SHARE engaged with over 1,000 actors in 22 European countries and a varied range of local actors such as NGOs, schools, hospitals, universities, housing associations, churches, migrant associations and others depending on the specific local context. And I took some publications of the SHARE with me for your consideration. In the context of the dramatic spike in refugee arrivals in Europe during 2015, the SHARE network promoted creative housing solutions and volunteering programs to support refugee reception and integration. Volunteers across Europe promote integration in many areas: in language learning, social guidance, finding housing and jobs, supporting children with doing their homework, engaging in sport clubs, accompanying patients to hospital visits, helping with filling in administrative forms, etc. However, still needs to be done much more to engage refugees themselves in volunteering, since it is essential to regain confidence, improve their language skills, create networks and connect with society, and to obtain professional experiences. It goes without saying that across Europe there are great differences in how newcomers are being received. Our experiences show conclusively that we can achieve successful inclusion of newcomers into all our community, but also that it does not happen by itself. More than integration, true inclusion must be actively promoted by coordinated and structured approaches to reception and integration, and by means of support for the creation of welcoming local communities. It goes without saying that personal and public leadership to work towards inclusive societies is key. And such leadership is even more required when questions of social integration and extremism are instantly being posed in the wake of the horrific terroristic attacks in Paris, Brussels and Nice. Getting back to the role of faith-based organizations and churches, I would like to give you some concrete examples to show their role that has been vital. Calling for welcome, tolerance and acceptance of refugees. Humanitarian responses assisting refugees in Greece and Italy among the Western Balkan route has been widely reported upon in the media. I would like to mention 3 welcoming and awareness-raising initiatives of the many, many that are developing throughout Europe. The City of Sanctuary movement, a movement that has called for hospitality and a culture of welcome, has been expanding across 80 cities in the UK with active involvement of churches and church leaders. The Action New Neighbors, or Action Neue Nachbarn in German. This initiative responded to the large arrivals in Cologne, amounting to 300 to 400 arrivals each week during a period of 1 year. The initiative was launched in 2014 by Cardinal Rainer Maria Wulki of the Archdiocese of Cologne, together with Caritas Cologne, to foster social inclusion built on the premises that human contact and exchange means that strangers become neighbors. New Neighbors offer small grants to grassroots reception and welcome initiatives proposed by the individual parishes, complementing the existing reception and integration structures and programs offered by the state and the city. In a short time, New Neighbors has recruited over 20,000 volunteers among local residents within the parishes. Neue Nachbarn offers an enormous source of inspiration of how a church initiative is taking up a new role in society, responding to the quite enormous challenges in integrating large numbers of arrivals. Cologne also inspired us on how to stay calm in turbulent times. Political leaders Henriette Reker and Cardinal Wulki of Cologne showed true leadership to maintain support for newcomers, even in the wake of the New Year's event in Cologne. Central and Eastern European governments have fiercely resisted European proposals to relocate refugees across Europe, being against receiving refugees from the Islamic faith. Most of these countries have still little diverse populations and fear that migration will profoundly change their society. The Catholic Church in Slovakia has stepped up against these fears and misconceptions about refugees with an awareness-raising exercise. Likewise, churches in cities like Gdansk, Poznan and Lublin in Poland have engaged in similar discussions around diversity, migration and refugees intake. Existing new initiatives and partnerships are being developed to engage citizens and private sector more from the outset in integration support, including in the labour market integration. Catholic employer organizations have been actively engaged in this effort. In the Mediterranean countries, significant support exists for receiving refugees, despite the financial crisis and the fact that this affected seriously social services in these countries. In Portugal, for example, a platform, Plataforma de Apoio aos Refugiados, has been created to welcome, receive and integrate refugees across municipalities in Portugal, including many faith-based organizations like Caritas, GRS and the Catholic Portuguese Relief Organizations for Migrants. In France, where newcomers still settle mainly in big cities like Paris and Lyon, parishes are developing services to receive refugees across countries, particularly that stay for prolonged periods in reception centers or from settlements like Calais. Dioceses have offered buildings belonging to parishes and offer integration support and action to the labour market, such as in the agricultural sectors, offering driving license to refugees in rural areas. Religious organizations and churches in Europe, Catholics and Protestants alike, have been on the forefront to prevent death at sea and to call for safe passage, pressing decision makers for more resettlement places, but also more legal channels such as community-based sponsorships, extended family reunification and student scholarship programs. Although in Canada sponsorship programs are well established and structured, this is not yet the case in Europe. Church initiatives like the Safe Passage initiative from the community of Sant'Egidio, the Federation of Evangelical Churches in Italy and the Waldensian Church proved to have been crucial pioneers in this area, having started on an experimental basis a project of private sponsorship which will bring 1,000 vulnerable people from Lebanon, Morocco and Ethiopia to Italy on humanitarian visas. The initiative is completely self-funded. The organizers take care of the flight, reception and integration. Already more than 300 refugees have arrived in Italy thanks to this humanitarian corridor, with another 150 to arrive in November. In the UK, a community sponsorship scheme from Syrian refugees has been launched recently. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is the first to have sponsored, in agreement with the municipality of Lambeth, a Syrian family with 4 children in a cottage on the grounds of Lambeth Palace. So how to conclude these anecdotal accounts of some of the responses we see happening in Europe? The need is real and solutions are available. Humanity is local and solidarity begins at local level, and churches and local parishes have tremendous experiences, resources and passion to offer. We therefore look forward to share these experiences across countries, continents and worlds. But however, in addition to this, public policies to promote inclusions are needed, and leadership will be required to implement these consistently over the years to come. I thank you for your attention.
Petra, thank you. You've shown us how it's not easy just to say that refugees and migrants need to be integrated, but we really need to do a lot of good, hard work to prepare those local communities to try to break down some of the attitudes, the xenophobic attitudes and the fear, and then also to help them see that they're really helping themselves by helping others. And you've taken a tremendous leadership role in this with SHARE and ICMC Europe. I want to thank you for that, but also the anecdotal bullet points that you gave us at the end give us some very good case scenarios for how local communities, churches, and others. In fact, a lot of this share was built on an experience in the city of Sheffield in England, which did this as a municipality, not necessarily as churches. So thank you for all the good work that you're doing and for all the different organizations and share that have worked so hard to collaborate, to make changes, and to provide for better welcome in their local communities. And now I'd like to call on Mr. Omar al-Muqdad, who's a journalist, a Syrian refugee, and also he's living proof of that whole process because he was served by ICMC in Turkey, and then also he was resettled through Migration and Refugee Services to Catholic Charities in Little Rock, Arkansas. You're very welcome, Omar. Thank you.
Grazie Padre per le tue parole, grazie mille. Grazie a tutti. Allow me first to introduce myself. My name is Omar al-Muqdad, a Syrian journalist and a resident in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to have this unique opportunity to be here today and to take part in this great event. I'm so honored to represent refugees of my country and everywhere in the world, and to be their honest and true voice. I hope my experience of being a refugee once will shed some light on the kind of suffering the refugees in general and Syrian refugees in particular have to endure before and after they flee their country. The person I was 5 years ago would have never imagined himself to be standing here or sitting here tonight in this position, talking to you about his experience as a refugee. But since the revolution started in my country, Syria, which later became engulfed in never-ending war and conflict, my life for sure has changed forever. Years before the Syrian uprising started, I was just a hard-working journalist, one with so many ambitions and dreams, which living under the Syrian regime made it all very hard to achieve. It was almost impossible to have the freedom of practicing my career without being constantly harassed and questioned by the authorities. At one point, I decided to establish a private newspaper and worked hard for it. But it was shut down after I wrote an article that was critical of the government or the regime. Actually, writing with my real name was a suicidal thing to do. In fact, in Syria, we don't have a freedom of a press. It's kind of North Korean regime. So what I have to do, I have to write with a pseudonym, a fake name, to sign my articles if I'm critical to the regime. So I was signing my early articles with the name Zorro. And I was really inspired by that movie. It was a suicidal thing to do, to use your name and to be critical to Bashar Assad. The Syrian regime used to imprison on regular basis anyone who would dare to criticize the regime and its institution, or if it to question its legitimacy. Unfortunately, I was one of these people that was imprisoned for speaking their mind about the regime. I spent 3 years in jail. I consider myself fortunate that when I approached the UNHCR while I was in Turkey, they helped me a lot and sent my case to the US and Canadian embassies in Ankara to be reviewed. Later, when I was granted a refugee status in the United States and arrived to America, I found myself a new home in the deep south of Arkansas. When I tell people that I went to Arkansas, I see that impression on the faces. It was really pleasant and the warm experiences. I spent the first few days for a few weeks actually, with a couple called Bitsab Margot. I really miss them. They treated me as if I'm one of their own, one of their sons. And they offered me a room in that beautiful home. And I was so pleased by the friendly atmosphere in the little town of Fayetteville. I was welcomed with open arms by everyone I met, and I became part of the community in a matter of weeks. I have nothing but great things to say about my experience with the Catholic charities and relief organizations in general. After I got the initial acceptance, the ICMC were there for me and helped to facilitate my case. They called me while in Istanbul, and I visited with them 3 times in their office. They arranged for me my pre-screening and medical tests, and also arranged an interview for me with the Department of Homeland Security to make sure I'm okay. The interview went really well, and it was followed by the questionnaire to see what kind of experience and qualification I got. After I was granted the asylum and arrived to the United States, Catholic Charities helped me with the housing, with the furniture, with everything. They put me on the road. I was very welcomed by the Catholic Church and offered to visit and mingle the people. I was pleased to be invited to speak in St. Joseph Church about my story and the conflict that was taking place in my homeland, Syria. ICMC was by my side and kept following up on my progress in on my new life until yesterday. I got emails from Jane. On my progress in my new life. I truly owe it to them for putting me on the first of the road here in the United States. Coming to the land of the free gave me the feeling of a freedom I dreamt about all my life. I found the kinds of freedom that I needed the most as a human being and, of course, as a journalist. The kind of freedom I wish upon all my people who lived most of their lives under a hostile regime and were deprived from even the minimum of human rights, and on top of it have suffered from war, bombs, and death, and were forced to run away from it all to the unknown. Pope Francis once said, "Migrants and refugees," I quote here, "migrants and refugees are not pawns on the chessboard of humanity. They are children, women, and men who are forced to leave their homes for various reasons, who share a legitimate desire for knowing and having, but above all, for being more." Let us all come together and show our utmost support to refugees at this tragic time and work hard to bring their misery to an end. I would love to go through a lot of details here, but because we don't have time, just 7 minutes, so I will conclude here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Omar, for bringing us the difficult experiences, but then the positive experiences that you've had. And I will bring back to Geneva the positive evaluation of the ICMC staff and share it with our Turkey Refugee Service Center as well. So thank you. We're coming close to the end of the session. I wish that we could open this up for a great deal of discussion, but I think we need another 2 hours for that, and we have not been granted that by the United Nations. But I would like to call on, before we conclude, I'd like to call on His Excellency Dominique de la Rochefoucauld-Montbel, who's the Grand Hospitaller of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which has a long, centuries-long experience in this area. So you're very welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Eminence, Excellencies, dear friends. Speaking of the success story of Omar is quite difficult, but I hope that he will be a light for all those who haven't yet succeeded and who are stuck somewhere on their road. Thank you very much for allowing us to say a few words and to contribute at this side event. We are very lucky because I will be handling two interventions, one reminding the commitment of the Order on the response of migration issues, and this at the plenary session, and I'll be present at the the 6th round table presenting some field experience and face-to-face situations. The Order of Malta has been following its fundamental vocation, Tuidio Fidei and Obsequium Pauperum, be faithful and serve the poor and the sick, and that it was reminded, and this for centuries. The Order of Malta is a sovereign and a religious entity of public law, has always been to care for society's vulnerable. Today, we have been mainly active on two fields. On the field itself, to serve people, and present in international meetings. Today, in particular, the vulnerable we support are migrants and refugees, with aid along the Balkan route, housing and assimilation help in a number of European countries, saving lives in the Mediterranean and Aegean seas, and implementing development programs in the migration countries of origin. As you maybe know, the Order of Malta organized last year in Geneva, within the UN premises, a symposium, Religions Together for Humanitarian Action. This symposium wanted to enhance the special role of faith-based institutions by supporting victims, children, women, men, of conflicts or climate, religious or political crisis. In Istanbul, the Order achieved its main objective at the WHS, that is, to contribute to the recognition and the affirmation by governments and humanitarian stakeholders on the impact of faith-based organizations and religious institutions that they have in reducing human suffering through the material and spiritual assistance to communities in need. Even non-religious organizations like the United Nations and its agencies have now recognized that FBOs have a unique comparative advantage in humanitarian contexts, as they enjoy a relationship of trust with local populations in which they are embedded. The WHS was a unique opportunity to highlight and to emphasize the importance of this component of humanitarian action on which the Order can build in the search of new approaches and cooperation initiatives. Having said that, I would like to put up maybe a question, and I don't know if I have to do it here. But I'm saying it very openly. What could be proposed that faith-based organization, recognized in their professional skills and also their values, can get a better support from international and UN agencies and a better access to international and UN funds? This is crucial, especially if we are getting more and more involved with the day-to-day crises. To conclude, may I just say that this major explosion of movements of people and the explosion of humanitarian problems issued from these movements are only at their beginning. From local migration, we are slowly moving to country global migrations, because some countries, their institutions are falling apart. And so populations are very reasonably worried. To be successful, we have to be more cooperative. To be successful, this is the only way that we'll be able to welcome with dignity. And to welcome with dignity, together, we must challenge global indifference, fear, and welfare selfishness. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, I think that your question gives us a real task as we move from the New York Declaration to the preparations of the compact and the frameworks that should follow. So thank you for introducing that question, and I think it's a good collaborative venture that we should look at as faith-based organizations. There's no more time other than for me to thank certainly His Eminence and the other speakers, but also all those who came. And I'm sorry that we didn't have time for further discussion, but I could see by your eyes and your faces that you were participating very, very strongly with our speakers. So thank you. Have a good day.